I am Martina Mitz, and hold on, I know that name is quite overwhelming for most of the people, so that's why I go with the user-friendly abbreviation Martina Mitz. I actually prepared a slide already for that, as I found two very nice definitions of the terms. So let's start with UX. UX stands for user experience. And this, what you see here, is the oldest definition of UX, the oldest official definition of UX, made by Don Norman, who we'll come back to in a second. So he stated that user experience encompasses all aspects of the end user's interaction with the company, its services, and its products. Where on the other hand, UI stands for user interface. And I found this nice definition, nice short, simple definition in techterms.com, which says that user interface is the means in which a person controls a software application or a hardware device. And as you can actually probably already see, there is a very strong digital focus in the UI definition. So it's the surface with which a person and a machine interact. And this is what user interface designer is responsible for. Where on the other hand, UX or a UX designer is more responsible for all aspects of the interaction. So it means a more holistic picture of the human product, service, or machine interaction. As you can see on the following slide, I try to show the process of both design disciplines. Or actually, it's not a process, but what it implies, what each discipline implies. To start with explaining that in more detail, I would simply state that UX design is responsible for designing the flow or the behavior of a product or a service. And this is how it's actually responsible for the feel of a product. Where on the other hand, UI design is the one that defines the look of a product, and so the visuals of a product. And let's start with that explanation, although it's not quite exact. Let's start with it to go further and make it more clear. So as said before, UX design is that discipline that's responsible for the overall feel of a product, or it can be a service as well. So although we can't design feelings or direct experiences in people, what we can do is design the character or the behavior of a certain product or a certain service, and therefore invoke certain emotions in people. And for that, UX design actually encompasses many disciplines. The common in that including of disciplines is actually that the user is in the center. Therefore, it's also called user-centered design, or abbreviated UCD. A UX designer is usually creates a holistic concept of a product or a service, and that is normally based on user feedback. So there is some primary pre-concept user research that's taking place in many cases. And then it depends on the size of the company In the conception phase, the UX designer will usually strongly collaborate with representatives of the different disciplines, and usually the closest collaboration is between a UX designer, a visual designer or UI designer, and a developer, as these both ensure the feasibility of a product. Some typical tasks of a UX designer are the creation of storyboards to convey certain ideas or to describe a user path or a user flow, but also the creation of user journey, or also called user journey diagrams, which are based on actual user data gathered before. Then also a sitemap can be created just to visualize the structure and the flows of a homepage. When there is a homepage or an existing product already or a service, also an evaluation in the form of an expert review can take place. Out of the user data gathered before, usually personas are being created, so to ensure that everyone is aware and also fine with the user types designed for. And then starting with rough concepts, this can be in forms of sketches, going through low fidelity wireframes, which are actually the digital blueprints of usually a website, a digital product. But also, as I said, depending on the company's size, many times a UX designer will also create high fidelity mockups or even pixel perfect designs. And usually the whole process or the whole active work of the UX designer is wrapped up by an interaction style guide, which is pretty much the documentation of all the rules and the whole system. As you see, or probably see, UX design is a very iterative process, and that is why the actual execution of UI design, which isn't an iterative or it is an iterative process, but changes in the UI design are more effortful. So that is also the reason why it usually the execution of UI design comes towards the end of a project. And a UI designer is usually called graphical user interface designer, as most of the surfaces or user-facing materials or interaction platforms are digital. So being called from GUI, graphical user interface designer, but also all the substitute graphical designer, UI designer, user interface designer, or just interface designer, up to visual designer. So everything, all these terms actually do mean the person that's responsible for the visuals. And I said before, UX on the one hand is the feel, and UI on the other hand is the look. And that is not quite right, because the look also conveys a certain feel. But we'll get back to that in a second. A UI designer responsible for the aesthetics and the visuals of a product, usually, for example, when it's again about a homepage or a website, is responsible for the layout of the website, the colors, the fonts and symbols, or called icons, and also buttons and links, but also form elements, which altogether are called the UI elements. Some typical tasks of a UI designer, and I'm sure a UI designer will be better of listing everything here. I don't want to make anyone's job smaller than it is, but from the UI designers that I've worked with, many of the deliverables or tasks I've seen are usually starting with a mood board. So creating a mood world for a certain style or design system. Then creating design mockups, which are usually very closely discussed with UX designer and developer. And then going to pixel perfect designs, defining all UI elements, creating assets for the developer, design specifications also for the developers, and then usually wrapping all up if there isn't any before in a visual style guide, which pretty much is the guideline for the look of a product. And now that's where the interesting point comes. As I said, the look and the feel isn't quite right, as the look already conveys a certain feeling. So a practical example is, for example, when I work with a UI designer, and we look at the design mockups, and then I start commenting about the mood of the colors or the design. It might be too heavy for the user, or might be too depressing, too dark, or whatever comments there are that I make. They are on a higher level. So they are in terms of the whole picture of the feel that we want to convey to a human being interacting with that product or service. So don't forget and keep in mind that actually the UI designer is the expert who can go into detail and has the rationale of certain decisions. And also the thing is that a good UI designer can and should actually be user-oriented. So this is where you see the borders become even more fluid and unclear, because we both talk about what it looks like and what it feels like. But then the expert in the what it looks like system is the UI designer. And as I said, I'm the one that will allow myself to only comment on a higher level in terms of the holistic strategy of the user experience.